Billionaire fakes paralysis to test his fiancée and freezes when he sees what she does. The air in Miami that particular night seemed charged with a different kind of electricity, a promise hanging under the blanket of stars dotting the sky over the Coral Gables neighborhood. For Ethan Harrington, a man accustomed to steering the fate of companies and shaping the market as effortlessly as others breathed, that night was the true pinnacle of his existence. In his mid-30s, he had already built an empire in the tech and innovation sector, his name synonymous with success and his fortune a legend whispered in the most exclusive circles across the country. He owned cars that were works of art on wheels, a mansion that defied modern architecture with its bold lines and panoramic views of the city, and a respect that preceded him in any boardroom. Yet, amid all the gleam of gold and the weight of power, the only treasure that truly mattered to him was seated across from him, bathed in the soft glow of candles dancing on the table at the city's most upscale restaurant. Victoria, with her long hair and eyes that seemed to hold entire galaxies, was the center of his universe. Each of her smiles was a deal sealed, each touch an incalculable dividend. He loved her with an intensity bordering on the irrational, a devotion that disarmed him and made him vulnerable in a way no competitor ever could. That night, the ambient sounds of the restaurant, the subtle clink of silverware, muffled conversations, the gentle melody of a piano in the background, seemed to fade away, creating a bubble of silence and anticipation around their table. Ethan felt his heart, normally trained for calm under pressure, pounding against his ribs. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind 1,000 times, but reality was infinitely more overwhelming. With a movement that was both fluid and laced with nervousness, he stood, rounded the table, and, to Victoria's surprise and the few curious glances around, knelt on one knee. The world seemed to hold its breath. From the small velvet box he opened, a masterfully cut diamond captured the candlelight and returned it in 1,000 sparkling fragments, a miniature sun promising eternity. "Victoria," he began, his voice usually so firm and commanding, now a whisper choked with emotion, "you've given me a purpose beyond any business, a happiness no money can buy. You're my north, my safe harbor. Will you spend the rest of your life with me? Will you marry me?" The tears that sprang to Victoria's eyes were the answer before words could even form. A euphoric and tearful yes echoed through the space, followed by spontaneous and warm applause from the other patrons. She threw herself into his arms, the ring now on her finger sealing a promise that, for Ethan, was more sacred than any signed document. Within 24 hours, the news was the headline in all the society columns, news portals splashed their photos, and social media buzzed with well wishes. The couple of the year, the modern fairy tale of Miami, was officially engaged. However, away from the spotlight and the public celebration, in the sobriety of an imposing office lined with books and mahogany, a shadow of doubt lingered. His father, the patriarch of the Harrington family, a man forged in the steel of hardships who had built his own legacy before passing it to his son, didn't share the same blind enthusiasm. Richard Harrington was a shrewd observer of human nature, and years of ruthless negotiations had taught him to read between the lines, to see beyond appearances. He summoned Ethan for a talk the next day, the aroma of strong coffee and cigars hanging in the air. "My son," he said, his voice deep and measured, fixing a penetrating gaze on Ethan, "I'm happy for you, truly. But love, real love, isn't made of fancy dinners and diamond rings. It's forged in fire, tested in adversity. A person's true character only reveals itself when the ground shakes, when the storm hits without warning. Are you absolutely sure Victoria's love would withstand a trial like that?" Ethan, still floating on the cloud of engagement bliss, defended his fiancée with the passion of a lion. "Dad, you're being too skeptical. Victoria loves me for who I am, not what I have. I feel it every time she looks at me. She's the woman of my life, and nothing will change that." Richard took a long sip of his coffee, his gaze never leaving his son. "Trust is a virtue, Ethan, but blind trust is a danger. You built your empire by testing every investment, every strategy, every line of code. Why should the most important investment of your life, your heart, be exempt from a stress test? If you're so sure, if the foundation of this love is as solid as you believe, then there's no harm in putting a little pressure on it, just to confirm. Think of it as an insurance policy for your happiness. The seed of doubt, planted with the precision of a master strategist, began to germinate in Ethan's mind. He loved Victoria unconditionally, but his father's words echoed an ancestral wisdom he couldn't simply ignore. The idea repulsed him on a fundamental level. Manipulating the woman he loved, deceiving her, seemed like a betrayal. But his father's question hammered at his conscience. What if he was wrong? What if the castle he believed was built on rock was actually on the sand of convenience? The possibility, however slim, was terrifying. After a long, sleepless night, weighing the pros and cons, loyalty and prudence, Ethan made a decision that would forever alter the course of his life. He sought out his father the next morning, his face marked by the poor night's sleep, but his eyes displaying a new and somber determination. "All right, Dad, I'll do it. I'll create a test. But know that I'm doing this with a heavy heart, and with the certainty that Victoria will prove you wrong. She'll pass, and then we'll never speak of this again." Richard merely nodded, an indecipherable glint in his eye. He took no pleasure in it, only the necessity to protect his son from the only bankruptcy that truly mattered, that of the heart. The plan was in motion. The curtain was about to rise on the first act of a tragic play, and the protagonist, blinded by trust, could scarcely imagine how devastating the script he had begun to write would be. The decision, once made, weighed on Ethan like a shroud. Every smile exchanged with Victoria, every wedding plan they made, now seemed tainted by a layer of deception. He felt like an imposter in his own love story, a cruel director orchestrating a tragedy without his lead actress's knowledge. But the seed planted by his father had taken deep roots, and the need to know the truth, to have absolute and unshakable certainty, became an obsession that outweighed his moral discomfort. To execute a plan of this magnitude, he needed an accomplice, someone with unquestionable credibility and the discretion of a confessor. The name that came to mind was Dr. Marcus Reynolds, the Harrington family doctor for decades. A middle-aged man with graying hair and a demeanor that inspired calm and trust, Dr. Marcus had cared for Ethan from childhood scrapes to the rare adult flu. They arranged a meeting in his private office, away from prying ears at the main hospital. The room, with its characteristic scent of antiseptic and leather, became the stage for the conspiracy. Ethan laid out the plan with the same precision he would present an investment project, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Marcus, I need your help with something unorthodox," he began, feeling the weight of each word. "I need to simulate an accident, a serious accident." Dr. Marcus, who was polishing his glasses with a cloth, stopped and stared at Ethan over the lenses. His eyes, accustomed to diagnosing illnesses, now tried to diagnose the sanity of the young man before him. "Ethan, have you lost your mind? Simulate an accident. For what purpose?" Ethan then recounted the conversation with his father, the doubt gnawing at him, the need to test the depth of Victoria's love. He didn't hide the shame he felt, but neither did he back down from his determination. "The story needs to be convincing," Ethan continued, diving into the details. "I thought of something related to a workout. I was doing a functional training session in a park, maybe in Biscayne Bay. I was hanging from one of those exercise bars. My grip failed, and I fell badly. A nasty fall." He paused, visualizing the scene. "The diagnosis needs to be devastating. Multiple fractures in the legs, maybe tibia and fibula. And to make it more dramatic, an injury to the cervical spine, something that justifies a neck brace, and, most importantly, the possibility that I'll never walk again." Dr. Marcus sighed heavily, a sound that seemed to carry the full weight of the Hippocratic Oath. "Ethan, what you're asking goes against all my principles. I'm a doctor. My duty is to heal, not fabricate illnesses." "And you won't be fabricating an illness, Marcus. You'll be helping me diagnose a feeling," Ethan retorted, his voice laced with desperate urgency. "Think of it as an experimental procedure to save my future life from a potential emotional catastrophe. I need to know if she'll stand by me when the empire crumbles, when the successful man becomes a burden. Please, your loyalty to our family is the only thing I can trust right now." The doctor paced the room, hands in the pockets of his white coat, conflict etched on his face. He had watched Ethan grow up, knew the young man's integrity and his father's shrewdness. After minutes that felt like an eternity, he stopped. "All right," he said reluctantly. "I'll do it, but let it be noted that I profoundly disagree, and may God forgive us for toying with something so serious." The pact was sealed. In the following days they refined the details. The accident would happen on a Friday afternoon. Ethan would check into the private hospital where Dr. Marcus was head of orthopedics, using a service entrance to avoid witnesses. And so it was done. That Friday, Victoria's world collapsed with a phone call. On the other end, Dr. Marcus's calm and professional voice sounded like a death sentence. "Hello, is this Miss Victoria? This is Dr. Marcus Reynolds from Miami General Hospital. I'm sorry to inform you, but your fiancé, Ethan Harrington, has suffered a serious accident. He's in critical condition. It's important that you come here as quickly as possible." The phone nearly slipped from her trembling hands. The drive to the hospital was a blur of panic and tears, every red light a torture, every slow car an unbearable obstacle. She burst into the ICU reception like a hurricane, her face pale, eyes wide with terror. A nurse guided her down a sterile hallway to an isolated room, and there he was. The sight was more shocking than anything her terrified mind could have conjured. Ethan, her Ethan, the vibrant and full-of-life man, lay motionless in a hospital bed, pale and vulnerable. Machines beeped in a sinister rhythm around him, displaying graphs she didn't understand, but that screamed danger. His legs, the same strong legs that had carried her so many times, were fully casted and suspended in a traction system. A rigid neck brace immobilized his neck, and his face, usually so expressive, was a mask of contained pain. "No, my love. This can't be happening." The sob tore from her throat as she rushed to the bedside, clutching his limp hand. His skin was cold. Ethan, following the script, opened his eyes slowly, a rehearsed groan escaping his lips. He tried to smile, but it came out as a grimace of pain. "Victoria," he whispered, his voice weak and hoarse. "I'm sorry. I think I won't walk again." The words hit her like a physical blow. Her crying intensified, a desperate wail echoing through the silent room. "Don't say that. Don't you dare say that. You will walk, yes, we'll get through this together. I'll take care of you, I promise," she said, the words tumbling over each other amid the tears, kissing his hand repeatedly. After a few minutes, she composed herself enough to seek out the doctor. She found Dr. Marcus in his office, his demeanor somber and professional. "Doctor, for God's sake, tell me the truth. What happened? Will he be okay?" she pleaded, her voice trembling. "Doctor." Marcus sighed, a theatrical mix of resignation and sorrow. He pointed to MRI images against the light. "Miss Victoria, the fall was catastrophic. The leg fractures are complex, but our biggest issue is here," he said, pointing to the cervical spine. "There was vertebral crushing. The spinal cord injury is extensive. We did everything humanly possible, but the chances of him regaining leg movement are remote. I'm sorry, but you need to prepare for the possibility that Ethan will be permanently in a wheelchair." The ground seemed to vanish beneath Victoria's feet. The world spun. She clung to the edge of the desk to avoid fainting, the buzzing in her ears drowning out the rest of the doctor's words. The bright future she had imagined, trips, parties, a glamorous life beside the city's most coveted entrepreneur, shattered into a million pieces. In its place rose the grim image of a life devoted to caring for an invalid. In that moment, in the icy silence of the office, as tears still streamed down her face, a new emotion, cold and calculating, began to sprout amid the shock and pain. Fear. Not just the fear of losing Ethan, but the terrifying fear of losing herself in his tragedy. The test had begun, and the first crack in the facade of perfect love had just appeared. The days following the accident were a blur of white hallways, the smell of ether, and the constant sinister melody of heart monitors. To the outside world, Ethan Harrington was fighting the battle of his life. For Ethan, the battle was internal, a silent struggle against boredom, guilt, and the growing anxiety of watching his plan unfold. The first weeks were exactly as he expected, or rather, as the optimistic part of his heart hoped. Victoria was the epitome of the devoted and worried fiancée. She arrived at the hospital first thing in the morning, her eyes still swollen from the previous night's crying, bringing flowers that seemed to wilt instantly in the sterile atmosphere of the room. She sat by the bed for hours on end, holding his hand, reading passages from books he couldn't absorb, or simply watching him in silence, her face a mask of anguish. "How are you feeling today, my love?" she would ask, her voice a soft whisper. "Need anything, water? Want me to adjust the pillows?" She was tireless in her small acts of care, a constant presence that, at first, eased some of Ethan's fears. However, even behind the facade of devotion, Ethan, now a passive and keen observer, began to notice subtle nuances in her behavior. Victoria's concern seemed to have a specific, almost obsessive focus. Her conversations with him were filled with forced optimism, but her true anxieties revealed themselves in her frequent and furtive meetings with Dr. Marcus. Ethan saw her intercepting the doctor in the hallways, her voice low and urgent. "Doctor, are you sure? No new technology? No experimental treatment in Switzerland, in Japan? Money's no object, you know. There has to be some chance, no matter how small." The emphasis on chance was almost desperate. It wasn't just the question of a lover worried about her partner's well-being. There was a tone of an investor checking the prognosis of an asset that had suddenly lost all its value. Ethan, lying immobile, realized her question wasn't, "Will he suffer?" but, "Will my life be like this?" The look in her eyes, when she thought he wasn't watching, wasn't one of compassion, but panic. It was the look of someone seeing their future of luxury and freedom replaced by a sentence of servitude, a life of sacrifices she had never contemplated. The future she feared losing wasn't the future with him, it was the future through him. As the days passed, Victoria's visiting routine began to change, almost imperceptibly at first. The shift was subtle, like the tide slowly receding, leaving the beach more and more exposed. Morning visits became afternoon ones. Long hours of silent companionship were replaced by shorter, more hurried visits. "Hi, my love, sorry I'm late, traffic was hell," she would say, already glancing at her watch. "I have a super important meeting with the wedding planners. Need to reschedule everything, it's a mess." The wedding, once a topic of joy, was now mentioned as a burden, a logistical problem to solve. The excuses began to pile up, each more elaborate than the last. "I can't come tomorrow, need to handle some things for my mom, she's not doing well with all this. I got stuck in a work commitment I couldn't cancel, you understand, right, love? Life goes on." The phrase, "life goes on," hit Ethan like a punch. Yes, her life went on somewhere out there far from that claustrophobic hospital room, while his was supposedly paralyzed forever. Ethan felt the distance growing not just in hours, but in the quality of interaction. Conversations became superficial. She talked about a friend's drama, about a new boutique that opened in the mall, about anything to distract from the oppressive reality of that room. Her touch, once so affectionate and constant, became hesitant, almost perfunctory. A quick kiss on the forehead upon arrival, a hasty handshake on departure. She avoided looking at his legs, at the traction apparatus, as if ignoring the source of the problem could make it vanish. For Ethan, each missed visit, each flimsy excuse, was a small death. The hope he harbored that she would prove his father wrong began to fade, replaced by a cold and bitter pain. He was in a double prison, the hospital bed and the web of his own lie. He couldn't confront her, couldn't demand her presence, as that would break the character of the fragile, dependent man he had created. All he could do was observe in silence as the woman he loved drifted away from him, step by step, leaving a frigid void where there had once been warmth and promises of eternity. The solitude in the hospital room became his most faithful companion, and the sound of Victoria's hurried footsteps fading down the hallway was the sound of his heart breaking, slowly and inexorably. The test was far from over, but the preliminary results already pointed to a catastrophic failure. The turning point, the moment when Victoria's indifference crystallized into concrete action, came on the day Ethan finally got discharged from the hospital. The transition to the mansion, which should have been a moment of relief, only amplified the magnitude of the catastrophe in her eyes. The house, once a stage for glamorous parties and a symbol of power, transformed into a gilded prison, full of obstacles and memories of a life that no longer existed. Temporary ramps were installed, furniture rearranged, and a ground-floor bedroom with a view of the garden was adapted to become the new center of Ethan's universe. The wheelchair, now his inseparable companion, creaked softly over the polished marble, a sound echoing the fracture in their lives. Victoria, standing in the middle of the living room, watched the scene with an expression that was a mix of pity and impatience. The reality hit her full force. There would be no miraculous recovery. This was their new normal, and she hated it. The final straw was a tense conversation a few nights after Ethan's return. He, seated in his wheelchair by the window watching the city lights come on, felt her presence in the room like a cold front. "Victoria," he said, his voice calm, "I know this is hard, but I need you. More than ever." She paced back and forth, arms crossed, avoiding his gaze. Finally, she stopped and exploded, not with anger, but with exhausted frustration. "Hard, Ethan. It's impossible. I don't know how to do this. I'm not a nurse. My whole life has stopped. My friends call to go out and I have to say no. My plans, our plans, everything's gone to waste. I can't take this house anymore. This silence, this smell of medicine. I wasn't made for this." The words, cruel in their honesty, hung in the air like toxic smoke. In that moment, Ethan saw clearly. There was no love left there, only the resentment of an investment gone wrong. It was then that she presented her solution, an idea that had come to her as a convenient epiphany. "Look, I have a cousin, Gabriella. You don't know her. She came from a small town to study nursing here in Miami. She's simple, you know. Lives with her parents in a modest neighborhood, needs money for her studies. She knows about this stuff, caring for people. I can talk to her, offer a good salary for her to come here every day, help you with everything. It would be perfect. She gets experience, money, and I can breathe a little, get back to having a life." The proposal was so cold, so transactional, that Ethan felt a lump in his throat. He was being outsourced. The care that should come from love was being replaced by a paid service, but, faithful to his role, he merely nodded weakly. "If you think it's best," he whispered, the disappointment so deep it was almost physical. And so, the next day, Gabriella entered his life. She was the opposite of Victoria in every way. Where Victoria was polished and glamorous, Gabriella was simple and unpretentious. Her hair was almost always tied in a practical bun, her clothes functional, and her face, without makeup, was adorned with a shy smile and kind eyes that seemed to observe everything with genuine calm. She didn't enter the mansion with the dazzled admiration of a visitor, but with the discretion of someone there to work. Her first interaction with Ethan was marked by warm professionalism. "Good morning, Mr. Ethan." "I'm Gabriella." Victoria explained the situation. "I'm here to help with whatever you need," she said, her voice soft, without a trace of pity or discomfort. The days with Gabriella were different. The heavy atmosphere of the house began to lift. She moved with silent efficiency, anticipating his needs before he even voiced them. She prepared his meals not as an obligation, but with evident care, asking about his preferences, bringing fresh juice in the mid-afternoon, a plate of cut fruit. She helped with his bath with a naturalness that removed all humiliation from the situation, treating his injured body with respect and dignity. It was the little things that made the difference. She didn't just push his wheelchair through the garden. She stopped to point out a hummingbird, commented on the scent of a night-blooming jasmine, and struck up conversations about topics that didn't revolve around his condition. She talked about her college classes, about missing her small town, about her dreams of one day working in a pediatric hospital. She saw him not as an invalid, but as a person. One afternoon, as the sun gilded the garden, Ethan couldn't contain his curiosity any longer. "Gabriella," he asked, his voice a bit hoarse, "why do you do all this? And I don't mean just the job, what Victoria pays you for. You do more. You don't complain, you're always smiling. Why?" She stopped arranging a vase of flowers and looked at him, a melancholic gleam in her eyes. She hesitated, as if weighing whether to share a piece of her soul. "Because I know what it's like to be sidelined," she replied, her voice low and sincere. "In my family, I was always the second choice. My older sister was the pretty one, the popular one. I was the quiet one, the studious one, the one left behind. I know how it hurts to feel invisible, like you're a burden to others. I don't want you to feel that way. No one deserves to feel that way." The simplicity and depth of her response disarmed him completely. There it was, the true gold, not in Victoria's grand words, but in Gabriella's silent empathy, forged in her own pains. While Gabriella became the light in Ethan's dark days, Victoria drifted further away, diving headfirst into the life she felt had been stolen from her. With the Ethan issue conveniently resolved, she felt free. Excuses for not visiting him became rarer because she simply stopped feeling the need to excuse herself. Her Instagram, once full of couple photos, now showcased her bustling routine: lunches with friends at trendy restaurants, nights at hot bars in South Beach, and eventually photos at exclusive parties where she appeared, smiling alongside other men. They were heirs, entrepreneurs, the same circle Ethan frequented. News traveled fast in Miami. Mutual friends with a mix of pity and malice sent him screenshots. He saw Victoria radiant in a designer dress, her arm linked with another millionaire's, laughing as if he had never existed. Each photo was a stab, a brutal confirmation of what his heart already knew. The woman who had promised to love him in sickness and in health had abandoned him at the first trial, trading the promise of care for a glass of champagne and the company of a more functional replacement. The test was yielding conclusive results, and the pain of the truth was more paralyzing than any injury he could have faked. The weeks turned into months, and Victoria's presence in Ethan's life became a ghostly memory. She had disconnected completely, an island drifting from the mainland, leaving behind only the cold ocean of indifference. For Ethan, each day under Gabriella's care was a lesson. He learned about quiet strength, about generosity that asks nothing in return, and about a form of love that wasn't declared in candle-lit dinners, but demonstrated in the patience of a bath, the joy of a mundane conversation, the simple act of being present. The comparison between the two women was an abyss. Victoria was a firework, dazzling, noisy, but fading quickly, leaving only smoke and darkness. Gabriella was an ember, quiet, constant, emitting a warmth that heated the soul and persisted even through the longest, coldest nights. The pain of Victoria's betrayal still existed, but it was slowly being supplanted by a new and overwhelming feeling of gratitude and admiration for Gabriella. He knew the test needed an endpoint, a final act to seal the fate of everyone involved. It was time for the confrontation. With his father's help, who watched everything from afar with a mix of sadness and validation, Ethan planned the final scene. He called Victoria. The first time in weeks his voice sounded on the other end of the line. "Victoria," he said, his voice carefully calibrated to sound fragile and a bit desperate. "I need to see you, and your family. I have something important to say." Surprised and perhaps a little annoyed by the interruption in her new life, she agreed reluctantly. "Fine, Ethan. Come tomorrow afternoon." The next day, one of the Harrington family's trusted drivers took him to Victoria's parents' house, a luxury condo in Brickell. He maneuvered the wheelchair up the ramp to the front door, his heart pounding not from nervousness, but from cold resolve. He was no longer the victim, he was the judge about to deliver the verdict. He found them in the living room, an environment decorated with ostentatious luxury. Victoria was there, uncomfortable, her parents with expressions ranging from pity to formality. The mother, a woman whose social ambition was almost palpable, forced a smile. The father seemed genuinely embarrassed. Ethan positioned the wheelchair in the center of the room, the silence heavy as a stone. He took a deep breath, the actor in his final role. "I came here today," he began, his voice choked, "because despite everything, I still love you, Victoria. And I don't want to give up on us. I know things are different now, but my love hasn't changed. I want to go through with our plans. I want to marry you." The words hung in the air, a final test, one last chance for redemption. Victoria's father seemed relieved, breaking into a smile. "That's great, my boy. I knew we could count on..." But he was interrupted by Victoria's voice, sharp as shattered glass. "Dad, shut up." She stood, her face a mask of incredulity and repulsion. She looked at Ethan, not as the man she loved, but as the obstacle in her path. "Marry?" She spat the word. "Ethan, look at yourself. I can't do this. I can't. I'm young. I have a whole life ahead of me. You expect me to spend the rest of my days pushing a wheelchair? To give up my dreams, the trips, everything? To be a full-time nurse? I'm sorry for what happened to you, really, but I can't sacrifice myself like that. I don't want to live caring for someone in a wheelchair." The silence that followed was absolute, deafening. The confession, so brutal and selfish, was the final nail in the coffin. The truth, raw and naked, hit him. Not with the pain of surprise, but with the weight of confirmation. He just stared at her for a long moment, letting the ugliness of her words echo in the room. Then, without saying more, he turned the wheelchair and left, leaving behind a shocked family and the echo of his heart breaking for the last time. Back at the mansion, the pain gave way to liberating clarity. The test was over. The farce, the weight of the deception, could finally come to an end. That night, he found Gabriella in the garden, watering the roses under the twilight light. He watched her for a moment, the simplicity of her movements, the peace she emanated. He rolled the chair up to her. "Gabriella," he said, his voice firm, devoid of any fragility. She turned, smiling. "Yes, Mr. Ethan?" He took her hand, her skin soft and a bit dirty with soil. "Gabriella, in these last months, you've shown me what true care means. You've shown me kindness, respect, and a dignity I thought I'd lost. You didn't see a cripple in a wheelchair, you saw a man, and that man is falling in love with you." Her eyes widened, a blush rising on her face. "Mr. Ethan, He interrupted her, his heart overflowing. "I know this is sudden, but I've never been so sure of anything in my life. I can't offer you the parties and glamour the outside world offers, but I can offer you my heart, my loyalty, and a lifetime of gratitude and love. Gabriella, will you marry me?" The tears streaming down Gabriella's face weren't from shock or pity, but from pure, overwhelming joy. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked. "Yes, I will." The honeymoon was at an isolated and paradisiacal resort in Hawaii, a place where the world seemed distant and time ran at a different pace. On their second night there, in the private bungalow overlooking the Emerald Sea, Gabriella was unpacking, humming a soft melody. Ethan watched her from the wheelchair, his heart full of a love he never thought possible. It was time. With an effort that was purely theatrical, he gripped the arms of the chair. Then, slowly, he stood, first planting his feet on the ground, then straightening his legs, standing fully upright. Gabriella turned at the sound, and her jaw dropped. The scream she let out was muffled by her hand over her mouth. Her eyes darted from his legs to his face, confusion and shock warring in her expression. "Ethan, how? It's a miracle!" He walked toward her, each step firm and deliberate, and cupped her face in his hands. "No, my love, it's not a miracle," he said, his voice soft, looking deep into her teary eyes. "I was never paralyzed. It was all a test, a terrible, misguided test to find the truth. And in the midst of all that lie, I found you. You, Gabriella, are my truth. You showed me what true love is." The shock on her face gave way to understanding, then to a smile that broke through the tears. She hugged him tightly, her body trembling, not from anger at the deception, but from relief and a happiness so immense it seemed too big for her chest. The farce was over, and real life, built on a foundation of genuine love, was just beginning. The news of Ethan Harrington's marriage to the nurse spread through Miami's social circles like wildfire in dry grass. It was met with a mix of disbelief, scorn, and a reluctant hint of admiration. Victoria, immersed in her new life as a coveted single, laughed at the news with her friends. "Poor thing," she said with false compassion. "She has no idea the life of sacrifices awaiting her. But if she likes pushing wheelchairs, who am I to judge? At least someone's doing the dirty work." For Victoria, the story had ended in the best possible way. She was free, her reputation intact as the poor fiancée who couldn't handle the tragedy. and the path was open to find a new suitor, one who was, in her own words, whole. Life for her was a continuous party, and she had no time to look back. That is, until the afternoon when the house of cards of her narrative collapsed spectacularly. She was at a sophisticated cafe in Wynwood, with a group of friends when one of them, idly scrolling through her phone's newsfeed, choked on her coffee. "Oh my God, you won't believe this." She turned the phone to the group. The screen showed a headline from a business news portal. Ethan Harrington announces international expansion and stuns at industry event. The photo accompanying the article was what made Victoria's world stop. In it, Ethan, impeccably dressed in an Italian suit, stood at a podium, gesturing confidently. Beside him, looking at him with radiant admiration, was Gabriella, her serene and natural beauty outshining any artificial glow. There was no wheelchair, no sign of frailty, just power, health, and a love that seemed palpable even through a phone screen. The silence at the table was broken by a friend's shocked whisper. "But wasn't he paralyzed?" Victoria felt the blood drain from her face. The buzzing in her ears was deafening. The truth hit her not like a wave, but a tsunami, sweeping away all her certainties, all her justifications, and leaving behind only the ruin of her own selfishness. It was a test. It had all been a test, and she had failed miserably, humiliatingly, and worst of all, publicly. Desperate, she stood, knocking over her chair, and ran out of the cafe, ignoring her friends' calls. She drove like a madwoman to Ethan's mansion, her heart pounding wildly with a mix of fury and panic. She needed to fix this. She needed to rewrite the story's ending. She burst through the mansion's gates, which opened for her car, out of an old system habit. She jumped out of the vehicle and ran to the door, which was opened by a visibly surprised Gabriella, whose silhouette now showed the soft curve of an early pregnancy. "Victoria, what are you doing here?" "Get out of my way," Victoria snarled, shoving her aside and entering the house. "Ethan!" He appeared at the top of the staircase, descending the steps with a calm that infuriated her even more. "Victoria," he said, his voice cold as steel, "to what do I owe the honor?" She stopped at the foot of the stairs, her face twisted in a mask of tears and despair. "It was a lie," she sobbed. "All a lie. You tricked me. You humiliated me." "No," he replied, stopping on the last step, looking down at her. "I didn't humiliate you. I just gave you a mirror, and you didn't like the image reflected in it. I gave you the chance to prove our love was real, that it went beyond money and convenience. I prayed every night that you'd pass the test. But I love you," she screamed, the words sounding empty even to her. "I made a mistake. I was influenced. I was scared. Give me another chance, please. We can forget all this. We can go back to what we were." Ethan descended the last step and stopped a few feet from her. Gabriella approached and stood beside him, and he instinctively placed a protective arm around her. "There's no going back, Victoria. There's nothing to go back to. When I needed you most, when I was at my most vulnerable, you turned your back on me. You traded me for the first party. The first glance from another man, you left, Gabriella stayed. She cared for me when she thought I had nothing to offer but a burden. She loved me for who I am, not what I can provide. She's my true love. She's my family. Now please leave my house and never come back." Each word was a final sentence, a nail in the coffin of her hopes. The rejection was so absolute, so irrevocable, that it shattered what little remained of her dignity. She looked at the couple before her, the image of happiness and the future she had thrown away, and felt a bitter hatred for herself. In tears, she turned and fled, the sound of her own downfall echoing in her ears. Victoria returned to her parents' house, where she collapsed in accusations against her mother, blaming her for the poisonous advice, for the greed that blinded her. But deep in her soul, she knew the blame was hers alone. It was too late. Regret settled into her life like a chronic disease, a shadow that followed her everywhere, turning every couple's smile, every news of Ethan's success, into a torturous reminder of what she had lost. Meanwhile, in the mansion now filled with light and laughter, Ethan and Gabriella's life flourished. Gabriella's pregnancy advanced, and with it, the couple's joy and anticipation. On a warm night, seated on the veranda watching the stars, Ethan's hand rested on Gabriella's belly, feeling the slight movement of their child. "You saved me, you know," he whispered, his voice full of an emotion that still surprised him. "I was becoming cynical, believing everything had a price. You reminded me what truly has value." Gabriella turned her face and smiled, the love in her eyes brighter than any star in the sky. "We saved each other," she corrected gently. "I was stuck in a life where I felt invisible, and you saw me. We just found each other at the right time." Together they promised to build a family, not on the unstable foundation of fortune or fame, but on the solid pillars of loyalty, respect, and a love that had been tested in fire and emerged stronger, purer, and unbreakable. They had found their happy ending, not in a fairy tale, but in the imperfect and wonderful reality of life. Did you like this story? Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss the next powerful story. Your support means a lot. Thank you so much, have a great week, and see you in the next video.